Hey, it's Thanksgiving soon, so we've got to get ready for dinner, right? And then there's Black Friday shopping. But what the heck? Let's not wait for Black Friday. Let's put this stuff on eBay right now because it is time for our 20 eBay listings of the month of November. Welcome, everybody. I'm George the Antique Nomad. As you can see, this guy works really well. And this is one of the items that we are going to list on eBay right now while you watch. The listings will drop as you're watching if you're a level 2 or 3 member. And thank you folks who are level 2 and 3 members for your support. We're glad to give you early access to this video. And for everybody else, it will come out a little bit later, and you should still be able to see anything available in the links in the description. For the items that are on eBay, we list 20 items at auction every month. And the reason that we do that, well, it's partly an experiment. It's partly a way to get some cool things to our collectors. And it is also a way to see a snapshot of the market at a given point in time. So even if you are not someone who is a collector of these items, well, stick around and watch because we're going to show you what's interesting and cool about them and why we think they're good candidates for eBay, what we think we might get out of them, and then you can follow along and see how we actually do. So let's get started with this one. This is, we can unplug it now, I guess. This is a General Electric M47 hand mixer from about 1963, and it's a great example of modernist industrial design. And this orange color is about the most desirable. It came in several different colors. That was a big thing for GE in the early 60s, was coming out with lots of different pastel and hot colors that people could have on their appliances as well as their small appliances. So these were really cool, and they're a great design. They look something between, I'm not sure, a spacecraft, a jet airplane, a speedboat. I mean, they could be a whole lot of things. This one's in good shape. It does work, as you saw. It's got a little bit of natural wear on top of the metal in the orange there from being used because it is not brand new, but it does have its other piece. Let's get rid of these. This is a good way to show that the release works just fine. And we can put this in it. Now, this was supposed to be for mixing deep into a bowl. My father thought it looked like a great thing to mix his paint with, and I remember my mother and he had a big fight over her GE M47 hand mixer, and she informed him that her tools were hers and he was never to touch them again, and I don't think he ever did. I always got a kick out of that in later years when I would see these and remember that story. So the people who had these really liked them, and apparently they were tough enough to stir paint. This is going to start at just $9.99. It should close somewhere in the $35 to $45 to $50 range plus shipping, because the orange in particular is a desirable color. So that will be fun to see how that does. Now, let's see what we have for you next here. Ah, yes. This is from about the same era. This actually came out right about 1965, and you can tell because it's very flower power. And look at that interesting, fun design. It's very freeform and sort of primitivist. But who would take the time to design a piece of styrofoam like this? Yes, that is styrofoam. Not some great pottery or some wonderful metalwork or anything like that, but styrofoam. Well, here's one guy who would style that, and that is Sasha Brostov. He made these as the beginning of his therapy and comeback after he had his nervous breakdown in the middle of 1962. He became very overwhelmed running his pottery company. It had been very successful. He was to the point of burnout and he needed a break. He became agoraphobic and basically hid out for a couple of years. And his friends said, boy, you really need to get back in the swing of things. And they suggested for therapeutic reasons that perhaps he should start working in other mediums. Well, styrofoam was easy to get and it was cheap, and he started making designs in it and came out with this line. This one is not in perfect condition. It's got a few little stains like you see there. I think somebody actually may have thought to put a plant in it briefly at one time. It's amazing it's still around. Almost none of these are. There's a little chip there, but you do not see the styrofoam stuff. Again, we're going to start this as a very low price, probably again $9.99. But if you go to Worth Point, if you folks have that, you can get an idea of what this might sell for, because these are very hard to find and they're by a good designer, so they actually go pretty well. And I'm curious to see how this one's going to end up, because I haven't seen any on the market in years, at least not in the real world market. Like I said, there's one Worth Point listing, so don't come up with them very often, and I'm looking forward to seeing who the ultimate collector for this is. Now, the next item I have on the roster here, I have to give credit for my owning it. And I think actually we are sharing, even though she insisted that it was a gift, because these came from Amy at Yoso Boho. And she gave me this because she was watching one of the videos and saw that I had a customer who was looking for hull drip glaze, and he wanted the green. Well, there's two shades of green. It turns out he did want this, which is the green agate, but he's actually looking specifically for a certain type of mug. And this is actually a soup mug, which was not what he was after, but it has the snack tray. These would have also been considered TV tray sets in the 1950s and 60s. This came out around 1960, and the drip glaze line was a big mainstay for them. It was actually officially called Home and Garden. So you will see it listed that way sometimes on eBay. And Home and Garden stayed in the line until Hull Pottery closed around 1986. So a lot of people, including some folks who are on the younger side of collecting, are aware of it. And that is part of the reason that it is very popular. It's also popular because it has really earthy colors. There's a tangerine color similar to that hand mixer. There's this, which is the closest to a jewel tone, but there's also the brown drip, which is what you see the most. This piece you do not see very often. There's one listed on eBay now, and they want some money for it with shipping. And they said it's the last of 4 sets that they had, and they were getting about $35 a set. This one has a little bit of wear on the tray, but it doesn't have any chips or cracks. And so we're going to see how it does. I think that this could go potentially in that range as well. Replacements Limited has 0 in stock, so that tells you how common they are. Not so much. And that's interesting because a lot of the other drip glaze really is fairly common. All right, let's see what we have next. Oh yes, this piece is fun. Let me get that for us. It's just right over here. And this is the first of a few pieces of costume jewelry we have for sale tonight. And this one seemed perfect because we have the holidays coming in. It is a very pretty wreath pin. This one is by the company that made Juliana. This is DeLizza and Elster out of Rhode Island. And it has really beautiful stones. It's got the Aurora Borealis stones. It also has textured stones. Juliana was well known for these wire overs where they would put wires out and then they could do other designs. So there's some metal leaf work there on the back because Juliana did not use a permanent mark. They just had paper tags and people ripped them off as soon as they put the piece of jewelry on. So you almost never see one with an original tag, but those rivets are very distinctively Juliana. They used that particular style. They were very, very strong. And that's why Juliana stayed in business so long, or DeLizza and Elster, I should say correctly. That was the parent company. Juliana was a brand name they used really for a fairly brief time, but that seems to be the one that stuck with everybody. But this piece, which is about 2.5 or 2 3/4 around, from the 1960s, this would have been the kind of thing that attracted other companies to order from them as well. So they made for Weiss, they made for Kenneth J. Lane, and if you see any pieces of Sarah Coventry that seem really well made, they were also made by DeLizza and Elster. So they really had a great run. They were in business until the 1990s. There's great books about them. People love to collect them. This one, again, unbelievably, because I came by this right, we are going to start this piece at $9.99, and we're going to just see what happens, because I feel pretty confident that it will probably sell in the $60 to $75 range in the end, because it's the right color for the right time of year and the right design. So that'll be fun for somebody to wear out at the holidays this year. Okay, our next piece here is a Franciscan apple cereal bowl. It's a cereal bowl because it has a little foot. It's also a cereal bowl because it says on the bottom, "I am Franciscan's apple pattern. Please fill me with crinkles." Well, that gives us a very good idea of when this bowl was made. This was Franciscan's logo after Gladding McBean started using the Franciscan trade name. Well, they used this printed logo in the 1940s up until about 1950. Crinkles were soon known as Post's sugar crinkles because they were essentially competing with Rice Krispies, but they were a little heavier with sugar, and that was their big claim to fame. And they were introduced in 1950 because they figured little baby boom kids would love sugared Rice Krispies, and Post had a long history of copying Kellogg's, so it wasn't too surprising that they went down that road again. But they knew at first that calling them sugar crinkles, well, that might not make every mother terribly happy. But if you put a Franciscan cereal bowl for her kid in there, well, Franciscan apple was very, very popular at that time. And so that might get her to buy. And so this was a premium in cereal, and that's what makes this a little more special. A typical Franciscan cereal bowl starts at about $15, which is where we're going to price this one. Actually, more like $10 to $15. This one we're going to start at $15 because with the advertising, if we get somebody who understands this and appreciates it, or somebody who collects apple, which a lot of people still do, this with its line mate Desert Rose were the most popular dinnerware patterns in American history. And since we're in the time of year for serving, well, maybe Santa's cookies go in there, I'm not sure, but somebody is going to get a kick out of this, I think. And I'm curious to see if somebody understands the desirability of the advertising on the bottom. So Franciscan did not actually do a whole lot of this kind of advertising work. Post had to really lure them with a lot of money because they didn't really need the extra exposure. It was Post that needed their help rather than the other way around. They did do some other kinds of advertising later in terms of product placement. Specifically, the apple pattern is the dinnerware pattern on I Dream of Jeannie, and you can see it floating through the air on occasion. Ah, yes, our next piece here. This one I found interesting because, first of all, it's definitely in step with modernism. This is teak, and people definitely like the teak. I think this laminated look gives it a little bit more of a design, which I think is nice compared to a lot of teak pieces that are fairly plain and just sort of austere and brown. And the reason for that is because these were designed by a gentleman named Ernest Son, who is an American, and he had Ernest Son Creations. And he would commission other companies to produce his designs. So in this case, he went to right around 1950, about the time the name changed from Siam to Thailand, he had these made, and it says Siamese Teak, Ernest Son. So he really gets credit for being the person who introduced Thai teak to the United States at a time when Danish teak was starting to really take off. And because of that, Thailand also developed a teak furniture industry that I understand lasts until this day and did a lot of other things in teak. And actually, the quality is very nice, and some of those are really good modernist designs as well. They just are not as heralded as the Scandinavian because they were considered to be derivative. But really, they were produced about the same time. And like we see, there is a designer involved with this. So I think that maybe they deserved a little bit more due than they got. In any event, these do tend to sell. I would expect that this we'll start it off probably around $20 and see where it goes from there. I like the fact that it said Siamese because that puts it back in time so that we know that it's older because, of course, in 1949, the Thai people quit using the name Siam and began to ask that their country be called Thailand, which is how we know it today. Ernest Son also went on to do ceramic work, and the Ernest Son creations are very nice, very modernist, and the ceramics were all actually made by Hall China. That's who he commissioned to do his designs for them, but they say Ernest Son on the bottom. So when you see those pieces and you feel their weight and heaviness, you'll understand the quality because Hall China was well made. These pieces, on the other hand, were made just for fun. And if this looks like something that you remember seeing in the 1990s, well, yes, you are correct. There was a woman by the name of Susan Paley who started doing whimsical women with real color, wearing outlandish fashion in ceramics. And that was in the late 1980s and early 1990s. Well, around the same time, a woman named Lydia Cornier in Canada started doing the same thing. And her design were called SWACs, sealed with a kiss. This one actually is signed on the bottom, as you can see. Lydia Cornier is the signature on the bottom. She is an artist and she's still working today. She's best known now for a figure called Clancy the Cat, and Clancy the Cat is quite whimsical in this same way. But when she started off, she was doing these sorts of designs that were similar to what Susan Paley was doing at the same time, and they were very popular. And she had graduated from the Banff School of Arts, and what an amazing place that must be to be up by Lake Louise in that beautiful Rocky Mountain area. I could see where they'd be inspired all the time. But she also had a flair for urbane and clever and witty and whimsical, and so she started doing these designs. She also really put some extra effort into it. It is hard to do this gold on top of these other glazes because the gold wants to burn off. Let's see if we can get a little better focus for you so you can see all those little gold squiggles and things. So there was actually a lot of handwork involved in these. They were sold at specialty stores and boutiques. It was not something that you went to the department store to get. And you know, it's been 30 years since these came out. And because this is her original generation of stuff, it is considered vintage. I know it's hard to believe. 1992 is 30 years ago, folks. So vintage comes faster than we expect. And because of that, for me, I sold a Susan Paley piece over the summer. I feel like this is a new area to look for. And I like the fact that it actually was made in North America and not offshore. So for all those reasons, I think that it's a fun area to collect. I would say that we'll probably start this around $25 and see where it goes from there. They sold for more than that when they were new in the 1990s. Now, speaking of women, I think art is an area where women have been more empowered for a long time. But in the 1970s, thanks to women's liberation, there started to be more demand for representation of women in other occupations besides teacher, nurse, secretary, and also to depict women and men as being able to work together in a workplace without it being about interpersonal relationships. Nowadays, everything is about interpersonal relationships on TV shows, but at that point, it was important to establish that women had a rightful place and they didn't have to just be sexy to get anywhere in life. And so a television show was born starring Angie Dickinson, and it was called Policewoman. And she was kind of a badass. She was a real fighter in the show. I mean, there was lots of physical stunts. Angie Dickinson really didn't want to do the show. She had won the Golden Globe in 1959 for the movie Rio Bravo. Was in a bunch of other movies, married Burt Bacharach for a while, had a very interesting life. And she was reluctant to go into television because she knew it was going to be a huge job. Back then, they might do 21 episodes in a year. Nowadays, you might get 7 to 10 on a Netflix run. So they were doing a lot of work, and it was an hour show. So it was consuming most of her life. So she said, I will do it for 4 years and only 4 years. You can get it to syndication and then I'm done. And that's what she did. It was on from 1974 to 1978. It was still popular when it went off the air, but that was her deal and she was done. Having said that, she became an icon to little girls of the era. They made action figures, the Horseman Company did, and they made these accessories to go with them. And some of these accessories, especially if they're new inside the original cartons, which also had little stories and reels so that you could play act, well, These have become pretty hard to find, especially in this condition, and they can sell for as much as $75 each. So I'm actually doing this as two separate listings. We're going to have the Race Against Time as one outfit, and we're going to have Undercover Mission, which is the one that had a recent $75 sold, as the other lot. And I am going to start these again at $9.99 because I came into them unexpectedly inexpensively because of the circumstances of where they were. They were in a hoarder estate. I made a pile. They made me a price on the whole thing. And I thought, well, here's something that I can show that will be fun and interesting. And, you know, we see a lot of things because we deal in antiques and vintage that are, you know, they're old school. They might be a little sexist. They might be a little tawdry. And so to show something that is actually a representation of women moving beyond that in the popular culture, I think is a really fun thing to be able to do. And it seems to be why a lot of people are collecting items from that era. So we will put those up and see how they do. Our next item, I believe this is number 10, is in a little frame, and I think I'm going to leave it in there to show you. I will give the buyer the option of having it sent in the little frame or sent in a piece of cardboard. It is just a little slip that says this card entitles you to 1 glass of Coca-Cola free at the fountain of any dispenser of genuine Coca-Cola. This is from 1908. This is very early. Coca-Cola was really smart how they did things. They didn't try to do it all themselves. They let local bottlers build bottling plants. The local bottlers became wealthy, and they in turn supported the Coca-Cola company very, very heavily, and that's why Coke was able to grow so fast and become the world's largest single soft drink brand. Here it is out of the case, and you see here it's got a little crease and a little stain and a hole from where it was poked, and that is because where it was poked was to show that someone had actually used it. You can see on the back that that crease is there and a little bit more staining, and a ticket number because, of course, they had to have some way to keep track of these. The idea behind these was the bottlers would give these out. They had a deal at the local soda fountain that sold Coca-Cola that we will refund you the price of 1 Coca-Cola. And it was a great way to get people to come in because at that time, fountain drinks, you really had to go into the fountain. The syrup was in one container and the carbonation was in another, and it had to be mixed. And so it was a little bit of an ordeal. And so that is the reason we were just about to get Coca-Cola in bottles at that time. But this is the reason that they did these, because they're still promoting a fairly new product. Coca-Cola had only been around for about, I think 30 years when this came out, and had been largely a regional brand until they were able to build the bottling system. So these at one time were very valuable. The Coca-Cola directory collector's guides of the 1980s, I think it was Peretti's, had this at $200 at one time. Well, of course, being paper and the fact that a lot of old drugstores have closed across the country, over the years they have found more of these. So they're not as scarce as they were when that book was written, but they still are pretty collectible. I am going to start this one at only $19.99. I believe that the likely selling price is probably closer to $50 these days, but we will find out together. Now, this next piece I've got to grab. This relates to a season that has just begun. And for those of us who like it, well, we're excited because it's hockey season. And this is a rather clean, rather good condition, genuine rookie card for Brian Trottier of the New York Islanders. Brian Trottier was the last of a series of draft picks that they made when they were trying to build the team. The Islanders got off to a really, really bad start. They were going to be a WHA team, or actually a different WHA team was going to move into the Coliseum, and the NHL did not want that to happen. And so they quickly rushed a team together and shoved it into that arena so that the WHA couldn't get a foothold. But everybody in New York was pretty loyal to the New York Rangers, which were one of the original 6 teams. This was way out in the suburbs. They had the first year, they decided they weren't going to bring in a bunch of washed up stars. They decided they were going to start with rookies and draft picks and build the team. That turned out to be a great strategy in the long run, but the first year they had the worst record in the history of the league. They were unloved and unwanted and almost went out of business, but they kept drafting rookies. And one of the last ones they drafted in 1974 was Brian Trottier. And between he and their other draft picks, within a few years, they not only made the playoffs for the first time, but by the late 70s and early 80s, they were the dominant team in hockey and won 4 Stanley Cups in a row. This is about the time I started watching hockey, so I was definitely very familiar with Brian Trottier. He still has the record for the most points in a single period. He was one of the 100 greatest players in history, as named by other NHL players. He skated his way to 7 Stanley Cups. He was really amazing, and the fact that this is his rookie card, especially because the Islanders were not popular then, not a lot of people were collecting NHL cards to begin with, but they especially were not collecting the New York Islanders. So kids who got these were glad to trade them or put them through the spokes of their bicycle. Nobody knew this guy was going to be a big star. That's why this card in this condition could be worth somewhere between $55 and $75 now. And that is why we're going to put it on eBay, because I think we're in good timing. It's the season for this, and we have people looking for gifts. And this is one time of year where I start to think in terms of things that people buy for each other as opposed to just what they collect for themselves. So we'll see what happens, but I am excited to put him out there and see how he does. All right, the next piece, because we're approaching the holidays, I thought we should have one holiday item at least. And let me find where it is. We have this piece here. It's in its original box, and it is the Gorham Sterling Snowflake Limited Annual Edition. This one is from 1971. This is the second year that these were done. They started in 1970. A designer named Richard Maella created the first one. He may say Maella, I don't know. That it might be Maella. I'm giving him a little bit more Italian, considering he was from the United States, then probably is right. But this was his second version. When he created these in 1970, his idea was that no two would be alike, because no snowflakes are alike, so they're always different every year, and that they'd have lots of faceting to catch the light and shine the light around the room. Now, this one has a little bit of tarnish, even though the box does contain the original silver cloth, because somebody really liked to look at this piece, so they had it sitting on top of the silver cloth. I have not polished it. You can see it could be very shiny bright like this. You can also see the marks that mention that it is Gorham Sterling. Gorham's a great old company. They started in 1831, and they were one of the biggest industries in Rhode Island for many, many years. I thought what was neat about this, and part of the reason I'm leaving the tarnish, is that this also is presented on a chain. Somebody was wearing this as jewelry, and I thought that was pretty cool, and I wanted to leave it because it would make a great piece of jewelry. Maybe not against plaid, but you get the idea here. It's just a really cool thing. I've always liked these. I've always respected the work. They could be very expensive new. You could even make a headband out of it. When they first came out with these in 1970, the designer hoped that maybe they would sell for $10 each. They ended up being very, very successful, and for a long time they sold for a really high premium. That has come back down to earth now because some of these are coming out of collections, so they're not as scarce as they used to be to find. But I still see retail values on these anywhere in the $40 to $75 range, typically. And, you know, it's a nice piece of sterling, too. And the fact that you can wear it as jewelry, that seems actually pretty inexpensive to me. So we're going to put this on and see if somebody buys it to decorate a tree or themselves. The 1980s were a very different time for children's television. In the 1970s, standards had been adopted where you saw things like superheroes who didn't really fight, and they were very, very concerned about what messages were given to children, and television had to follow a lot of certain formats. Well, in the 1980s, those regulations were largely done away with. And boy, did it go the other direction, because pretty soon you had people designing toys and then designing television and comic books around them. And one of the first examples of that was these guys, the Transformers. The Transformers told the tale as invented by Hasbro and the Tomy Company in Japan, who did a lot of the production. There were also versions of these done in England and Canada as well, and each variation can be collectible just because it's from a different country. This one is American because it's by Hasbro. It says Autobot Sunstreaker on the side, so you can see there. They're supposed to be alien warriors, of course, for those of you who don't know the Transformers story. The Transformers were more than meets the eye, because they would change from a car into some sort of an alien warrior. Or perhaps they would, if they were Decepticons, who were the other side, they would turn into them from, other machines and that sort of thing. So that is the idea of the Transformers. This one's in great shape except for one tear on the box, but everything else is all there. It is in the original box. It's in great original condition. Because of that, again, I think we're probably looking at a $50 item, but I am starting it again at $9.99. I'm starting a lot of things at $9.99 this month because I acquired them in a way where I can do that so that we can really see what the market is. Well, if you want to beat inflation, little leather libraries might be the way to do it. These are really cute little booklets that were done in the 1916 to 1925 period, and they were all miniaturizations of famous titles. So we have Lancelot and Elaine by Tennyson. This one is A Comedy of Errors by Shakespeare. We have The Murders at the Morgue, by Edward Allan Poe. Let's try that again. Edgar Allan Poe. Boy, I am really stumbling over it. This one is The Holy Grail by Tennyson. These are all bound in something that they called limp redcroft, which seems to be this sort of lined paper leatherette, but they have this very attractive, almost a bronze finish to them. As a Man Thinketh by James Allen. This one is Hiawatha, and they have volumes 1 and volume 2. I am selling all of these together as a lot. On the back, you will see that they are part of little leather libraries. The idea behind these was that you could buy them at drugstore counters, department stores, and even by mail order. And you could also order them in little cartons of 30 for $2.98. They sold them mail order as 30 great books, and you could buy them as little sets in a little holder that was a little, almost like a slider bookshelf, book stand, except that it was stationary and these would sit in them. If you can find them with that, that actually commands a pretty decent premium because not too many people kept those over the years. But a lot of people kept these because they were just sweet and cute and they didn't take a lot of space. The thing that is the most remarkable about these maybe isn't the books themselves, but what the legacy was that they left, because this company in 1926 changed to become the Book of the Month Club, and they are still in business to this day. They are now an e-commerce site where a group of judges judge books and they recommend them to millennials, and then the millennials, that's the primary customer now, can download these and discuss them between themselves. It's a great extension of the original concept of Book of the Month, which started in the 1926 as a mail order book house. So it's really cool how this simple little creation of these classic works has spawned something that still exists today and has been able to move successfully online. I think that's a great story. I think the stories in these are pretty great. And the fun thing about collecting them is there's 101 different titles. They're not terribly expensive. None of them are individually particularly rare. And because of that, it's a fun collection to start for not a lot of money. I'm starting these at $9.99 for the lot of 7. They typically sell for about $5 to $8 a piece. So if somebody is lucky enough to get them at $9.99, well, you might be able to turn around and make some money on these. I suspect they'll probably go to a collector instead, though, because there are a lot of people who think these are interesting still, and I certainly do too. Now, the typeface is small as you would expect, but hey, we all have readers, right? Those of us who need them. I probably need them, but I don't actually use them like I should. Our next piece here, I'm just really fond of this. It made me smile when I saw it. I'm going to show you the cover first. The cover is definitely very period. The cover also is, in some ways, a little misrepresentative of how great the stuff inside is, but it definitely evokes the era, because this is the cover. Decorative Ensemble by Royal Terry of California. Well, Royal Terry made terry cloth towels and napkins and things. You certainly would not know that by looking at this, because they posed a Dolls of the World doll in a lovely black taffeta dress under a table with an umbrella with some flowers. The only thing that looks like something Royal Terry would make is the background, because it's this bamboo mat. Because Royal Terry of California's business was making placemats and terry cloth linens and those sorts of things. They decided that they would couple up with a Japanese company. It might have been PY, because when you look at these, or Devar, it's hard to say, because the pieces that are the ceramics do not have any mark other than a Japan label on them. But this was the result. This is what you opened it up to find. Isn't this the cutest set? I just really think this thing is so darling. I'm going to take the pieces out so you can see them better. I don't want to tip it forward because they just sit loose in there, but this is exactly how it was presented, brand new around 1955. It has the 4 black placemats in it. It has all of the original linens in it. And if we take these out where we can show you better, it has the jam and jelly set. And when you take them out of that very cute little decorative thing, well, there's jam. I'm jam. And like I said, it just has a Japan paper mark on it from the late 50s. It has, and I didn't take it off because this is the original stickum they used to glue this inside so that when you opened up the gift set, it didn't fall out all over the place. Obviously, at some point, somebody tipped it forward or it dried out and tore in time, because both of these are sitting loose in there, and he still has his as well. But what that tells me is that this set was never actually used. Ever, ever, ever. It is new old stock. It is just like when it was made. It's, 65 years old now. It's pretty incredible. You just don't see a lot of things of this era that have never been opened, especially when they're this cute. And thank goodness this one wasn't. These typically sell starting around $50 and up. So that's what we're going to look for on these. We're going to a minimum of 50, but I honestly think that they are more interesting and cuter and better than that. And I have a feeling this could be something that could really surprise us. It's also good timing because it's in a gift box, and hey, we're approaching gift buying season for a lot of folks. The box is not in perfect shape. You can tell that it has had a little bit of a life. It was probably left in the linen closet under a bunch of stuff. But there it is, Royal Terry of California. I just think that is the coolest set, and I was so glad to see it. It came from a place in Cincinnati, and I'm just so delighted to have it. Also from that place in Cincinnati, now these are something that I'm selling for a collector. And she decided to let these go because she has a big collection of costume jewelry and decided it was time for these to be allowed to have a new owner. But the circumstances of how she got them are very interesting, and I was fascinated with it because I was aware of these at the time that they were sold, And I even remember looking at some of these online and then deciding that I just, my interest and involvement with costume jewelry was still pretty new at that time, and I didn't know exactly who the customer was. I'm so glad that this person that I'm helping with these bought these, because to see them again now, I have a very different viewpoint of them. I understand why this is such a cool thing, and it's great to have them and be able to present it to you now. About a dozen years ago, Lana Turner had died and her daughter was dealing with her estate. Well, Lana Turner had shelves and shelves and shelves built into her walls in her bedroom full of costume jewelry. She loved costume jewelry. And when her daughter decided to sell these pieces, she put them on eBay. And here is the listing, the original listing from 2010 when these were sold. They each came with a certificate signed by the daughter on the back saying Lana Turner carved wood bangle from her personal collection, signed and dated with the year. These are just fun jewelry pieces. I like the design on it. I like this wood bangle. This looks like something she would have probably worn in the 1950s or 60s. And she was just such an amazing star and had an amazing and sort of tragic life, or at least it could have been, except her daughter took care of her husband, allegedly. And her husband was pretty bad to her, and I guess that that just couldn't be abided anymore. So he went bye-bye, and that was a big controversy back in the day, of course. But time moves on, and here we have the signature from the daughter telling us that these items came from the estate. So a storied, fascinating, interesting person and an interesting origin. That is one lot that I will be selling. The other lot, these also came from her collection. If I can get them to focus, there we go. These are screwbacks. Now, Lana Turner apparently really liked screwback earrings. Apparently that was discussed when they sold her stuff. And that was one of the things at the time that I was reluctant about, because I knew that my customers didn't really like screwbacks very well. Well, who cares when you have a chance to buy something that was worn by a movie star? And that's the real appeal of these. I have a feeling that somebody who bought these probably would just keep them like this because they would not want to separate them or lose them. But we have all of the eBay listings, all of the original information from when they were purchased from the estate. So because of that, we have verification. And I do remember when all of this happened, and it's well known. If you talk to costume jewelry dealers, in fact, here we go. Here's some pictures from the original listing with the pieces in them. So it's just fun. I'm really excited to have these, and I think that somebody else will be excited to have them too. They will price higher than they would if they were just the same piece without this provenance. I would think that we're probably looking at, oh gosh, I think back then they were selling for $45 to $65 a piece, and I would not be surprised if we saw prices like that at this point, because there was a lot of it being sold at the time because she was such an avid collector. But once it was gone, I haven't seen a piece from this collection come out for sale again in years. So I'm curious to see how those will do. I think they're really interesting, and we'll find out together. Our next item here is, oh yes. Well, this next batch is literally just for fun, because this batch is a lot of tickets, mostly from concerts. We are getting into the time of year where people are thinking about going out for entertainment, especially this year because people haven't been the last couple of years. And so people are starting to get interested in arena shows and big performances again. A lot of people are interested in collecting tickets from old performances as well. Now, the farther back the better in terms of value and scarcity usually, but there are collectors for tickets of this era as well. These are from about 1990. Again, we're talking over 30 years ago now, and some of these acts don't perform anymore. That is part of the reason people collect them. I like this collection in particular because the person who went to these shows talked about the experience a little bit and wrote a little note on each one to tell us. So we've got the ticket folder there. This one is Bobby Brown, who apparently was fantastic. I understand he was a very good performer, even if he wasn't a great guy in a lot of other ways. This one, Janet Jackson, also got a fantastic. I imagine that's true. She's quite a lively performer. This one, Sade, gracefully fantastic. And I have to say, I agree with that. I actually went to this concert when it was in Seattle. These tickets are all from the New Orleans area. But I really enjoy, oh, and they even kept the parking stub on this one. You know, these are the kind of things, this is true ephemera. It was meant to be used that night and thrown away, and most people did. And that's why some people, in retrospect, are interested in these now, especially because some of these folks are gone. This one is Prince. On his world tour, the Lovesexy World Tour in 1988. So Prince is really coming into the peak of his popularity at that time, although he never really went out of style. There's just a whole bunch of stuff. I like the libretto. There's a bunch of other bands and performances, a whole ton of them here. And then there was this one. I won't say which performance this is, but the note on it says, "Please accept my apologies and don't hold it against me." So apparently this show wasn't so good. I got a big kick out of these. You know, it's just fun. There's even a receipt for $45 for tickets. I mean, that was considered very expensive then. Now that would be the cheap seats if you could even find anything for $45. So these are just fun. The reason people collect them is because of their own nostalgia for these people in these groups. I'm going to start this lot at $9.99 and we're just going to see where it goes. Typically lots like this sell for about $1 or $2 a ticket, so we might get around $30 for the group. We'll just see. That brings us down to our penultimate item here. Well, actually, no. I'll tell you what. I'm going to do this one first because it's so beautiful. I was going to make this the last one, but I just have to show you now because the last one will make sense in its context. But this beautiful bowl, which I was saving for last, is the next item that I'm going to put up on eBay. Look at the way it glows. It is just so gorgeous. This looks like something that could be as fresh and new as today, but this is actually Steuben glass, and this is the Steuben Aurene gold treatment, which Frederick Carter, the founder of Steuben, came out with around 1904, right after he opened the company. He immediately had to file a patent because Tiffany tried to sue, saying he was copying their designs, but actually the processes he used to make these designs were different. The way that they applied the coloration that created the gold was not the same. And if you look at it, it's very luminous and bright and really vibrant. Tiffany's is beautiful, but their Favril is darker and denser and heavier. So Steuben won their patent argument. And as a result, they made these pieces. This is on calcite. Calcite is this white base. And the calcite is a really nice 1910s and into the 1920s variation on this. So it extended the line. It just is a beautiful look. There is one place in the back where the glaze is applied again, where they didn't polish off the finish. And that usually is where the name is. But they also use paper labels sometimes, and this one is not marked, so that tells us that the paper label was used and that the paper label was gone. Sometimes they'll have an acid etched Steuben mark, and sometimes they'll have a fleur-de-lis. Beautiful pieces. I just think this is so stunning. It's quite large. It's 13 inches. I expect this to sell somewhere in the, oh gosh, probably $150 to $200 range. I'm starting it at just $95. We're going to see how it goes. I got this from our friends up in Harlan, Kentucky when I was visiting their shop. And so they're curious to see how it goes too. I told them I thought it was worthy of being on here. So we're going to get this on and see how people feel about it, but I sure love it. And then our last piece, I decided at the last minute is our last piece because it is a nice send-off into the upcoming season. And I also realized if I'm going to put this out there in time for people to use it for the upcoming season, I better put it in this month's instead of next month's. This is a Santa hand-painted, completely hand-painted canister. This is Italian from about 1970. I will show you the mark. In fact, it's probably late 60s, looking at the style and the mark. In any event, it says hand-painted Italy on there. And it is all hand-painted. It's all hand-painted and it's all done freeform. Now, undoubtedly, they had some sort of a pattern they trained their decorators to follow. But all of this is done. They just painted an outline and painted inside of it. So you've got the holly leaves on the top. It's a nice cookie-sized because Santa needs cookies after all. Notice that Santa is depicted in red. By this time, even in Italy, because of Coca-Cola, everybody sees Santa as wearing a red outfit and being a little bit on the portly side. That did not used to be true in Europe. It used to be he'd be dressed in green. If he was in the Netherlands, he'd be dressed in purple, and he was thin and he was pretty mean and chased after the children. So Santa Claus has changed over the years. But you can see all of the very cute decoration on this. I just thought the fact that this was all hand done was a really nice feature. I haven't seen this piece before. And, you know, the season is here. Again, we're starting this at just $9.99. So I imagine that somebody is going to think it's really cool. And we're just going to see what the market thinks of it. Again, I do this in part as an experiment. I don't necessarily have an idea of what these things will sell for, especially if it's something we haven't really seen. So we're all going to find out together. That's part of why we do this. In any event, I'm so glad to be with you again. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoy following these items in the marketplace. I'm looking forward to seeing how they do, and we'll have a follow-up video next month. And now, if you enjoyed this video, check out this one. Also, click thumbs up to like this video and check the description for information about our Patreon, our memberships. We've got a lot of different levels with different perks and bonus videos and early content. Also, please do check out our website, theantiquenomad.com, for appraisal help. And we'll see you again for more adventures in the antique and vintage community soon. Bye for now.